Good morning, Dan and Amy. I'm not sure that the planet is going to implode upon itself, but there is substantially more evidence that Illinois might, at least financially. Not unexpectedly, the state of Illinois' credit rating downgraded by Moody's to just above junk status, the lowest credit rating any state has had in the history of our country. Yeah. And it will probably be downgraded to junk again at the beginning of the fiscal year if there is not an agreement to change the trajectory of spending that is unsustainable in Illinois. That's why we're the worst governed state in the nation. That's how we have $250 billion in debt. That's why we have the largest unfunded pension liabilities in the country, is because we have been spending more than we've been taking in for a half a century. It's not that complicated. Now, getting out of it has become complicated because of divided government, with Chicago Democrats continuing to lord over the General Assembly. And so the General Assembly's legislative session has ended. The budget impasse persists. And this has been an opportunity for J.B. Pritzker, the Blagojevich whisperer.
That's what we're calling him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wanted to be state treasurer, maybe attorney general, maybe senator, maybe congressman. He got nothing and liked it and didn't like it, so he's running for governor. Here's J.B. Pritzker's latest ad in response to the lack of a budget.
What's happening in Springfield is offensive to our values and to who we are as a state, and Bruce Rauner blames everyone but himself. The failure to pass a budget isn't just about numbers. It's creating real damage to people across Illinois, especially those most vulnerable in our society. Thousands of women and children seeking refuge from violence are finding shelters either closed or with less availability than they once had. Substance abuse programs are at risk in the middle of an opioid and meth epidemic that's ripping up home care for seniors is in jeopardy. Access to mental health care is under siege. And with Donald Trump in the White House, now more than ever, we need leadership in our state that's committed to fighting for the people of Illinois.
Pritzker, Democrat for governor, fighting for what's right, getting things done.
Now, Pritzker is the most pronounced Democrat candidate for governor because he's spending so much money on TV at present. But that is a primary that is far from over, as there is real competition between the hard left and the hardest left. And we'll see if Pritzker survives the primary. So this is a long way from over, but he's the one that is making the most noise right now because he's spending the most money on television.
Yep, and hitting the airways early. But yesterday, Pritzker answered a question from Marianne Ahern about, those wiretaps that were leaked between Governor Blagojevich at the time and Pritzker. They're jockeying for what role do you want? If you can't have U.S. Senate, do you want the Treasurer's office? And Pritzker blamed Governor Rauner for the release of those tapes.
Well, it's clear that Bruce Rauner and the GOP have nothing to run on, and so they are simply attacking.
Mm-hmm. Did you or any of your team leak the story to the Chicago Tribune about J.B. Pritzker and his contact?
Oh, good grief, no. I mean, I heard that story yesterday. It just shows how broken our
in the Illinois Republican Party. Does anybody believe the Chicago Tribune is a house organ for the Republican Party in this state? Good grief is right. For more on this and how we go forward and where we can go forward, we're pleased to be joined by Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner. Governor Rauner, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy. How are you doing today?
Good. Good morning. So what about J.B. Pritzker's new spot where, he places, of course, all the blame at your doorstep?
Our system is so broken, and there are so many people running to maintain the status quo. And you know what? This really isn't about Democrats versus Republicans nearly as much as what it's about is the people of Illinois taking the power back from the career politicians and the Chicago machine. That's what this election is going to be about. And between now and the election, we've got to focus not on politics, but we got to focus on getting the job done, getting a truly balanced budget. And Dan, as you said, the problem is out of control spending. We have been spending more than we bring in for decades and decades. The majority that controls the General Assembly has been in power for 35 years. They never spend what we bring in. They always spend more. They've created hundreds of billions of debt on us, on our kids and our grandchildren. They've driven jobs out of the state. They have not properly funded our schools. The system is fundamentally broken. And anybody who would argue, and many in the majority in the General Assembly do argue, but anybody who would argue that we just need to raise taxes to solve the problem, that clearly is not the answer. That will just make our problems worse, not better. We need to change the system, grow our economy, and shrink the wasteful spending.
And we definitely need, a balanced budget, which hasn't happened in 3 years, or actually probably never has happened.
Or 3 decades.
3 decades. But how are we going to fix that problem?
Well, by persistence. I had an elderly woman come up to me the other day and grab me by the arm. She had tears in her eyes, and she said, "Governor, please, stay strong. Don't back down. You're our last hope." And she made me, I got a little teary-eyed myself. This is a big deal. It's so frustrating for everybody. People are being hurt by not having balanced budgets. Jobs are leaving. Carpenters can't find enough work because our property taxes are the highest in America. Truck drivers have gotten laid off because we raised the taxes and fees on truck licenses in Illinois and pushed our trucking firms to Indiana. Factory workers. I talked to a woman. She lost her job in a factory because her factory moved to Texas because the workers' comp rates there are much more reasonable. We have a broken system. It's hurting the people of Illinois, and we've got to change it. And raising taxes or more deficit spending only make the problems worse. No more stopgap budgets, no more deficit spending, and no way we raise taxes on the people of Illinois without major changes to grow jobs and true, lasting property tax relief that actually reduces the property tax burden on the people of Illinois.
One of the things that's frustrating for me is people not understanding that, yes, when you make promises you cannot fulfill, and promises, when the Ponzi scheme comes crumbling down, people are going to get hurt. And that's sort of what's happening with all of the big systems in government, whether it's in politicians' promises for a long time that were not being fulfilled on an ongoing basis and were impossible to fulfill. And now we are where we are. So, yes, people are getting hurt. But the frustrating thing is people connecting the dots to how we got here and who lied to them. And if they don't like being lied to, then perhaps they should stop supporting liars.
Well, exactly. The people of Illinois need to be told the truth. And the truth is we've had career politicians based in Chicago controlling our political system for their own benefit. Many of them have become millionaires because of the system and our high property taxes. And they've manipulated the system for their own benefit and for their cronies inside government and their cronies who make their money from government. We've got to get power away from those politicians. That's the reason term limits are so important. But we got to get power back to the people. Term limits will help. Property tax freeze with local control, ability of voters to reduce their property taxes through a referendum, that will help. Give power to the people to consolidate their local government. Don't rely on politicians. Give the people of Illinois the ability through a simple voter referendum to vote to reduce the number of units of government that they have to pay property taxes to, shrink that down from the ridiculous 7,000 units that we have today in Illinois, the most in America, shrink the bureaucracy, and restore power to the people, and we'll get a good future for our state again.
Going back to the anecdotes you were telling on the campaign trail of people coming up to you saying, "I lost my job because my factory moved out of Illinois," and so forth. It seems to me one of the, of course, underreported aspects of the families who live in the private sector and finance about what's happening for families.
On the campaign trail years ago, but I hear them every day as governor as I travel around the state. I just met with some frustrated factory workers yesterday. We are not growing our jobs nearly at the pace we need to. We still haven't caught up to the number of jobs that we had in Illinois 17 years ago. Now, I'm proud. Since I became governor, I've been way slower than Indiana's, way slower than Wisconsin, Michigan, Tennessee, Texas. We aren't growing our economy and growing jobs, and that causes people to suffer. Working families, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, truck drivers, factory workers, they're hurting. They're struggling in Illinois. They got high property taxes. They don't have what pushes wages up. We need to restore the quality of life by getting a strong, competitive economy and lowering our property tax burden on our working families so they can afford government consolidation and pension reform. All are things that we've advocated. All should be part of a balanced budget solution. And we've got to get the General Assembly majority. Speaker,
you two you had a chance to talk one.
And I found out later that the reason he did it, we didn't really. I tried to talk budget. I found out later was he used that brief meeting as an excuse for why he didn't show up when business leaders in Chicago asked me to meet with him and them in a three-way meeting on the budget. He refused to show up, even though I went and showed up. And he used the excuse, well, I just met with the governor, so we don't need to talk. It was all a sham to tell the business folks he didn't need to really talk to. He just met with me. It's all baloney. It's this false political spin. These phony headlines is what he's a master of. He doesn't deal with the truth. The truth is so bad for him and his allies in the legislature, the loyalists for him. The truth is so bad, they never really deal with the truth. They're always false spin, phony headlines. And that's what we need the people of Illinois to see through that and get at the truth.
For them to understand exactly what the options are and to, kind of get above the din that you're describing. At the end of the session, you said one thing very clearly, that any deal must necessarily include property tax relief for Illinois families. Can you just lay out what, where you have been willing to give and still are, and what are must-haves in terms of getting a constitutionally balanced budget that at least addresses some of our short-term challenges?
Yeah, Dan, so you're right. The one thing that I've been clear that has to be in any budget deal is true property tax relief. And what I mean by that is freeze property taxes where they are today. So the levy is capped for at least 4 years. But even more importantly than that, also give the people of Illinois, the taxpayers, the homeowners, the small businesses of Illinois, the ability through a very simple, easy voter referendum process to decide themselves in the future whether they want their property taxes to go up or down and by how much. In many communities, the taxes are already too high, and people should be able to vote to reduce them. Or if they want more money for their schools or a particular project in their parks or something, they should be able to decide and vote in a referendum to increase them. That's fair, it's reasonable, and it gives power to the people. That's the one thing that I'm not going to compromise on, not going to give in on. Our property taxes are too darn high. The other things are important, and I've given on many of them. I've tweaked. Term limits are important. I've said, okay, General Assembly, if you won't put them on yourselves, put term limits on me and all statewide officials, and put term limits on the legislative leaders at a minimum as a compromise. So far, they're talking about that, but they haven't agreed. They have passed pension reform, which I support. They have passed in the Senate procurement reform, which is good. I support. So those are baked. If those could come to my desk, I'd support them. And then in government consolidation and workers' comp, there are the other two issues that are still there. We've compromised a ton. I've said, let's just get workers' comp to someplace that will bring us so we're competitive. At least we're average among the states. We don't have to be the lowest like Indiana, but let's be average so we can compete for more manufacturing jobs through workers' comp reform. And then on government consolidation, 7,000 units of government, double the typical state, and it's causing our property taxes to be sky high. It's one of the causes. I said, look, let's just give power to the people. Let's let local taxpayers vote in a referendum whether they want to consolidate some of the units of government that they're paying their taxes to, that's taking their money away from their schools or taking money out of their pocket that they could keep a better quality of life for their families. Let local citizens, through a referendum, consolidate their local government if they want to. With that power, we'll change the system. That's what I've asked for. That's what can help get balanced budgets. And we're going to keep negotiating, trying to get those done. And
my instinct is that House Speaker Madigan isn't interested in giving you what would be perceived as political wins, isn't interested in getting a deal done, is interested in just relitigating this as a campaign issue in the 2018 cycle. Do you see, are you optimistic at all about a deal getting done, or is this going to November of 2018?
Well, you're right, Dan. The Speaker has no interest. He's been clear. He's been clear for all 2.5 years. He said, we want Republicans on a tax hike. That's the focus. He's been very clear, and he wants no changes. The good news is at least some of his legislators in his caucus know that that's not the right answer, and they are quietly beginning to stand up. We'll see whether they have the backbone to stand up and do the right thing. I don't know, but we got to keep negotiating with members in the caucus and the majority, get them to be actually work for their constituents in their districts rather than just for the Speaker. And we got to stay persistent on this. Hopefully we can get it done.
All right, the struggle continues. He is Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner. Governor, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy. Take care. Bye-bye.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen.